On this episode of Still Loading,
My life for ire.
my wife for hire? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today, oh my goodness, this is an episode long in the making. Last year, I did a series on the history of the RTS genre, and I left off pretty much one of the last episodes I did was on Warcraft, the Warcraft RTS series specifically, Warcraft 1 through 3. And of course, I did 2 episodes on Command and Conquer and whatnot, but one thing that I left off was the other classic Blizzard RTS series, StarCraft. And today I'm going to discuss the original StarCraft game, but of course I can't do this alone. And with me today is Mick of the Mick Arcade. Mick, how are you doing today?
Hello. Stay a while and listen. Hi. I'm
That's
great.
That's a wrong franchise.
Yeah, wrong franchise. I guess I should have been like, "Hey, Jim Raynor, Marshal of these here parts."
There you go.
There you go. That would have put it a little more on brand. I'm great, man. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for coming on the show. When I reached out to you asking you to come on the show, I was like, what games do you want to talk about? And you referenced StarCraft as one of them. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. I haven't been able to do StarCraft at all yet. And the person I would have had for this, he's been on the show a bunch of times. So I was like, well, let's change some things up, get some new blood in here.
Yeah.
But also, too, he's going to have a baby soon, so he's got enough to worry about.
That is fair. Well, it's funny because we were talking about me coming on to do an episode. You're kind of asking, what are some of your favorite games? And I threw my kind of standard list of stuff that I throw out there for whenever I guest on like video game stuff. And you're the first person that pick StarCraft out of the list. Usually nobody ever says it, and it's almost inevitably like Metal Gear or Final Fantasy or something. And I feel like I talk about that stuff ad nauseum, which is fine because I love that stuff, but I really love StarCraft and I just don't ever get to talk about it. So I was very excited that you said, hey, let's talk about StarCraft.
Well, I mean, what better reason not to? I mean, like, this is one of my favorite game series. Actually, before I go into my experiences with it, let's hear your experiences with it. So, Mick, how did you get into StarCraft, and what are some of your earliest experiences and just some of your favorite memories of it?
Well, it all starts with my older brother. So I'm 35, and he is 9 years older than me. So,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So growing up, I had access to a lot of things that I think a lot of kids that were probably my age might not necessarily have been exposed to game wise. With that being said, one of those big things tends to be PC games for a lot of people.
Yes.
For people older than me, they were more into a lot of PC games when they were younger, because in the late 90s, we got the like PC game boom. You've got like the Star Wars games like TIE Fighter and X-Wing, Age of Empire, StarCraft, Warcraft, Diablo, like it just so, and I mean, that's just to name a few. So my brother was really into PCs. Like he was into building PCs and, PC gaming and things like that. So of course, with that, you have to get involved with the Blizzard franchises.
Of course.
So my first exposure to Blizzard was Warcraft 2, Tides of Darkness, and then from there, StarCraft and Diablo. So when StarCraft came out, and he and I would both like play it. Like he'd sit there and play it and I'd sit there and watch him. I mean, that's kind of story of my life, is sitting in a chair or on the bed watching my brother play video games. Like that's so to like I was way ahead on the Twitch curve as far as a viewer, at least. Like I was watching people play games for years.
You youngins, I was watching video games before you were born.
Exactly. In my day, we watched them by sitting on a couch and the person
In
was
f
next to us,
in front of an open fire, and we burned our hands. No,
and we
sorry.
liked it. But so I would watch him play StarCraft, and I would also play, and it was one of those things of like, because we would take turns playing, and the original StarCraft has a very interesting level of difficulty, particularly at that time,
Yes.
because RTSs weren't like standard fare. You didn't know, like, okay, I got to do this, I got to do that. You're really figuring out strategies as you're playing the game, and this is the late 90s, so there's not a ton of this is the optimal path and play and the move to make. It's not like it is today. I mean, our internet was dial up, so I mean that
Yeah.
tells you right there how things were. But so it was a lot of troubleshooting and figuring things out. For example, we would go into multiplayer and create like local matches just to play against bots, and we couldn't figure out how to build things as the Protoss initially, because we hadn't unlocked and played their campaign. Like, we just played like Terran and Zerg, but we hadn't gone
Mhm.
all the way through. So we had no idea how to build things. We didn't realize that you needed to construct additional pylons. Like,
Mhm.
no idea. So you go to build a building, you're like, it's red everywhere. I can't put it anywhere. So I always remember that. And I remember good old BattleNet. Jumping on BattleNet and playing matches against people from all over, and them saying, again, the internet's not changed much. They said terrible things to you back then when you beat somebody and hit the old GG. That's something I definitely remember a lot. Uh, yeah, just tons of fond memories with StarCraft. I think the story is super compelling and super cool. There's
I
also a
would
lot of
agree.
there's also so many cool like Easter eggs and references to different like movies and franchises. I mean, in a lot of ways, StarCraft is Aliens. It's the movie Aliens. Like, the Marines
Yeah.
straight up do a ton of stuff ripped straight from the movie Aliens. In fact, the the dropship pilot, that the Terrans have, she just says word for word lines that the dropship pilot in Aliens says. We're in the pipe 5x5, and I'm sure that's like a legit thing that you could say. That's just straight up from the movie Aliens. Like, every piece of dialogue that character in the game says is from Aliens. So I love that. I love the references. Obviously, there's references to Predator, and
Mhm.
just the lore of the game's great. I love the art. I used to, while my brother would be playing, I would hold the instruction manual and like look through the art and read like because there's a lot of story and lore in Blizzard's old
Yes.
manuals. So I'd go through and read that, and really, really love that. So very close to my heart. I love it. I love it so much. Never been really great at the multiplayer aspect. I played a lot
Neither
of
have
it.
I.
Just
Mhm.
I'm not, like South Korean level good where I don't even need to look up. I could just type on the keyboard with all my hotkeys and build all this stuff. Like, but I still enjoy multiplayer. I don't know if I'd enjoy it now, like, because I'd get stomped. But back then I was like, this is great.
Now I just wanna play StarCraft. I mean, I did before this, but now I wanna almost, like, just stop recording now to go play some
Just
StarCraft.
play. It's so
Um,
good.
it is. So, for me, my own stories with it is the co-host, the original co-host of the show, Justin, he's the one that got me hooked on StarCraft. I remember having sleepovers at his house when we were a kid, and we would and I would watch him play StarCraft, and he played Protoss. We were talking off mic. Protoss is your
Oh
race of
yeah.
choice in the game, and I remember his strategy was always to build a carrier of, or sorry, a fleet of the aircraft carriers that had all the little fighter jets in
I
it.
did the same thing. I had what
Hmm.
I called the carrier rush. I would build 5 carriers in 5 minutes.
Wow, dude, that's more impressive. I could not do that fast. Uh,
That was the
yes,
only thing I could do. I lost a lot because typically in that 5 minutes, like,
you have
the
no
Zerglings are running
defenses
you
if you're
over.
yeah.
Yeah, you're all heavy invested if you're like, "If I can get to that 5-minute mark, I'm good. If I can't, I'm fucked."
Yep. So, so I would watch him play, and I was just obsessed with this idea of these armies. It was one of the first RTS games I had ever seen. I might have seen like Age of Empires beforehand unknowingly, but it's one of the first ones that gave me like a formative memory of it. And I was obsessed with the idea of like you can just build armies and go attack things. Like it was cool to me because I was as when I first saw it, I would say it was like 6th or 7th grade. So I was like junior high, middle school era. And at that time, I was obsessed with World War II and military stuff. And I loved the idea of like the military and like battles and all this other stuff, like a really romanticized version of what war is.
Yeah, you're like,
Uh,
"Oh, it's epic."
for the glory of mankind and
Yeah.
whatnot. And so I really was obsessed with it, and so when I saw that there was a game that kind of allowed me to kind of fulfill that idea in my head, I was just like, I didn't care that it wasn't World War II or whatever. I just thought it was cool, and it hooked me ever since then. And I remember playing a little bit of it uh at his house, and then for years I never really touched it. And then once I became friends with another guest of the show, Jamie, he would have these things called battle fests, and all it was that we would all meet over at someone's house with we each had our shitty laptop because it didn't take much to run StarCraft in like 2006 or 7 at that point.
Oh, yeah,
You
no.
just had to have a okay laptop, and that's what we had. And we would have LAN parties and just have these massive StarCraft LAN parties. But he worked at Pizza Hut at the time, so he didn't get off till like 11 p.m. So these wouldn't start till like 11, and then they would go to like 4 or 5 in the morning just playing
That's gaming right
StarCraft.
there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I could never make it though. I was exhausted by like 1. I'm like, why are we starting so late? This is awful. Um,
Get a different job, pal.
seriously, I don't care that it pays well. He was a waiter, so he made bank on those tips.
Nice.
But yeah, so that was my some of my earliest memories with StarCraft. I really was into it for the military thing, and then I kind of lost touch with it. And then once I kind of became friends with Jamie, and then him and Justin and I have all like grew up together, so we just kind of reconnected over StarCraft and just had these. We would have Diablo 2 nights as well. Oh, I need to do a Diablo 2 episode, man. I
I
fucking
love
love
Diablo
Diablo
2 as
2.
well. It's
I
I have one issue with Diablo 2 though.
mm,
I've never been able to beat it because for whatever reason, and I have gotten to hell with every single character in the game. So like I've played as every single class, but for whatever reason there's a spot I would always get to in hell, and in my for some reason something was corrupted. I'd have to uninstall and reinstall the game and lose all my
uh,
progress. So I would just start a new character. So I've never beaten Diablo, and it was always like the third floor in hell or something, and the game would crash
mhm.
and be corrupted. So it's one of those games that I've gotten to the end, I've just never beaten. So I will beat you, Diablo. You
That
can't
is
run from
hard.
me, Diablo. The Haradrim are gonna kick you in the nuts.
Well, that's another thing. We'll have to play together sometime then.
Yes, love Diablo.
So some fun facts about StarCraft, the original StarCraft. I was supposed to say StarCraft 2. It was first released on March 31st, 1998, in North America, and then in Europe it was also 1998. I don't see a release date for Korea, but we know it's gigantic in Korea. Like that's
Massive.
where the
They have
yeah,
TV channels dedicated to people just playing StarCraft. It is
that's
incredible.
it's just wild to me. The game development was pretty haphazard. Like it was kind of all over the place. Like it's for something as finely tuned as this game turned out to be. Not to be fair, there's been a lot of patches to balance, fine tuning the balancing of it. I believe that you can even see videos online going over like the history of the patches and what they did and what they tuned and whatnot. So yeah, it was kind of a haphazard mess. Like they didn't really know what they were doing. They were just like, let's try this, and they would do it. And when they first revealed the game in at E3 in 1996, it got panned. Everyone who was
Ooh.
there didn't like it. Journalists didn't like it, and it turns out that they like the presentation itself was haphazard. Like they're like, "Oh shit, it's E3. We need to get something for this." And so even that was thrown together. So based off the feedback from E3 96, not necessarily, and I don't know about specifics. From my research, I didn't hear any specific feedback they were given, but just in general, they like it was not well received. So they overhauled the whole game. And in the middle of the overhaul, sorry, one of the things that they did criticize though was that it was too similar to Warcraft 2. And from what I was reading, that's actually where they came up with the third race, because originally it was just going to be two races. I'm not sure if it was like Terran and Zerg or Terran and Protoss or like Protoss and Zerg or whatnot. But it was going to be two races, and people were like, well, that's too similar to Warcraft 2. So when they overhauled it, they added the third race in. And at the same time StarCraft was in development, another game was also in development, and that was the original Diablo. And they steadily pulled team members away from the development team until pretty much the only person left for a 2-month stretch was the lead programmer. Their tech lead was Bob Fitch, I believe his name was, and he was their tech director, and he spent 2 months rebuilding the entire game engine from scratch, just to get
Which
it to work.
that's amazing to me because, one of the hallmarks, at least for many, many years with Blizzard, and it was a criticism as well, was they take forever to put out a game. And the reason is because their level of quality that they expect from their product is so high that they don't want to release something that's bad. I mean, that was like one of the huge criticisms for StarCraft 2 was you guys denounced it and then it didn't come out for another 5 years or whatever it was. And again, like that's Blizzard, like that, or it again was. I don't want to say now because it's Activision Blizzard and it's a different ball game and things like that. But they're used to
Yeah,
taking.
it's got its own
Uh,
host of issues, yeah.
yeah, that's the truth. So they that used to be their hallmark is like taking their time releasing a really high quality game. So it's just funny to me that initially people were like, "This game sucks," and then they had to completely overhaul everything. But
Mhm.
at the same time, I mean, this is the company that Warcraft came about because Games Workshop pulled the Warhammer license from them and said,
Yep.
"Yeah, we don't want you to make this game anymore." And they were like, "Well, shit, we made Orcs versus Humans, Warcraft, let's go," and went from there.
Uh, I I think one of the most impressive things about Blizzard, I really wish that they would make an entire documentary about the early years of the company, warts and all. And I mean,
Yes.
I don't know how far back all the awful, like the alleged assault, like the sexual harassment. I mean, I don't know if it's alleged. I'm pretty sure has it been proven? I don't even know
Oh, it
anymore.
was proven. It was
It was proven.
absolutely a
Okay,
thing that
so
was
yeah,
happening. Yeah.
like yeah, so I hope it didn't go back that far, but who knows?
I don't
Um,
think it went back that far because, in the I kind of look at really there's like 3 time periods of Blizzard, and it's like 90s Blizzard, so like the early days where, they made Warcraft, and then you had Blizzard North because Blizzard North was actually a completely separate studio that eventually became part of Blizzard. Blizzard
mm,
North made Diablo, and then, StarCraft, so like that's its own era. And then once you get to like World of Warcraft, that becomes a new era. And then, of course, you have Activision Blizzard, which is like Overwatch and, Heroes of the
yeah,
Storm and all that kind of stuff. Although, like, I do think some of the nonsense was going on during like the heyday of World of Warcraft. I could be wrong, but
yeah, yeah,
I do agree. I think looking at the early days of Blizzard, like the early days with like Chris Metzen and Samwise and Mike Morhaime and all those guys, I think that would be really cool to deep
right?
dive on because to me the era of like 90s video game development is awesome because
Hmm.
it was straight up the Wild West. I mean, we're talking about this is late 80s, early mid 90s, like Squaresoft or Square, whatever you want to call them, Square Enix now. Um, one dude made like the first 6 Final Fantasies. He was one guy was the programmer for those. He retired at like 34 because he was insanely wealthy. So just stuff like that is amazing to me because it's so different now. Like now it's a multi-billion dollar industry and there's hundreds of employees that build games, and there was just one point where you literally could have like 6 dudes and they'd make a game. 3 dudes and they'd make a game.
Yeah, and I mean, like StarCraft had more than 6, but it was still not a huge staff at the time. Like I mean, there was still a lot of people at Blizzard, I would assume back then, but they, yeah, it's, I would just love to see it because the reason I even say that specifically is I'm just consistently impressed with how good their storytelling is. Like how good
Yeah.
their I don't know about their writing. I'm not a writer. I've never had an issue with it, but I will let someone who has a better grasp on on literary analysis than I do make those decisions, or make those judgments, I should say. But in terms of just like interesting plots, like every single one, they turned something that was nothing in Warcraft, Orcs and Humans, to something crazy in Warcraft 2 and even crazier in Warcraft 3. And then in StarCraft, from the get-go, like it's a really strong plot and a really interesting world. Like the settings they create are so fascinating. Like, and the fact that Diablo is as interesting as it is too, just based off the fact that it's a very simple look. It's like taking Christian mythology and like Christian biblical ideas and biblical demons and the devil and angels and hell and all this other stuff, and they're like, that could be something so boring, you know what I mean? Like, because it's, maybe it was fresh in the 90s, but like it could have been something so boring, but the story of Diablo is really good and it's really captivating. And I'm just consistently impressed by their work, and StarCraft is no different. StarCraft is just a really well told story, and um, I didn't have too many fun facts about the story, of like the story writing and how like that came to be. I had a lot more facts about like the development itself. So, for example, a lot of the visual design tenets of the game, Terran were like, a lot of Terran designs were square and clunky. Protoss designs were kind of like the whole aesthetic they're going for these, square and clunky for Terran. For Protoss, it was elegant and rounded, and for the Zerg, it was I like this, vaguely triangular and with spikes.
It's it doesn't
And
get better than that. I
it
mean, from
it's
I
true.
can tell you a little bit. I mean, I know a little bit. Some of my information might not be 100%, but Chris Metzen is largely responsible for a lot of the lore for the majority of the Blizzard games. And
Mhm.
in particular with StarCraft, I think he was like the lead designer for the game. But he's the guy who did a lot of the art in the manuals. He did a lot of the lore and the story building, and he's a great artist. I mean, he did voice acting for some of the games. Like he did voice acting for like Diablo. He organized the voice cast for StarCraft, which the voice acting in StarCraft is pretty incredible for an RTS game. Like outside of the units that just speak,
Mhm.
the before you go into a mission where you're doing the briefings and the stuff is getting acted out by all these incredible voice actors. Again, for 90, you said 97 it came out, right?
98.
98, yeah. So for 98, it's incredible. Like you did not have that quality of voice acting in games. I know for like a lot of people they point to Metal Gear Solid as being one of the first games where there was high quality voice acting and a ton of dialogue. Well, StarCraft is one of those games too where there was a lot and it was really well done and the story's really good, and a big part of that is Chris Metzen. Like he's the guy for many, many years was kind of the lore master for Blizzard. A lot of his ideas are what shaped those universes. And I mean, he was the voice of Thrall for Warcraft 3 for still to this
Really?
day. Yeah, like he's retired. He retired at like in his 40s or something like that. But if Thrall shows up, hey, call Metzen up. We need him to lay down some lines.
Wow, that's why, and he just kinda stumbled his way into voice acting then.
Basically, well, again,
That's
because like
nuts.
that's why I love like this, older video game development design stories because that's kind of how it worked. It was just like, hey, can you do a voice for this orc? Yeah, sure. Hey, can you do a voice for this, if this Protoss zealot? It's like, what's that? He's kind of like, he's kind of like a samurai. If a samurai was like the predator, and he's like a psychic warrior. Yeah, sure, I got it. No worries, let's go. Like that's what I love, because back then it was just voice acting was a thing, but voice acting in video games was few and far between.
That's nuts. And actually, and speaking of voice acting, a lot of the sound effects for the actual like the units in the
Yeah.
game, the individual soldiers, were done by Glenn Stafford, the one of the composers at Blizzard at the time. Specifically, he referenced like he did the Zergling noise, and I wrote down on my notes he makes the Zergling sounds just by making mouth noises, because he kind of like did like a he like took his cheeks in his hands and just kind
Yeah.
of like a crazy weird
I
noise with
love
it.
that stuff. We've
Yeah,
moved so far away from that in development now, and it's very surgical now, and like, well, yeah, we have like a huge library of noises and sounds, but back then it was just literally like the dude doing the music just slapping like a steak on a trash can lid or something to get a noise. Like I love
mhm.
stuff like that. I think it's so great.
Just kinda like like developing by the skin of their teeth, I guess, is the way you kinda do it. Like they're making games just in spite of their
Yeah.
like there's gotta be something freeing about not knowing what the standards are, you know? Like and that's something that you can never really recreate. Like, I mean, unless you completely live under a rock. Like I one of the actually, I mean, there's ways to do it. Like, I'm a huge Kevin Smith fan, and one of the things he talks
Oh,
about was
same.
that he didn't know about any of the rules of like what's commonly accepted in the movie making business. So when he made Clerks, it felt so totally different because he didn't know what he was supposed to and not supposed to do. So much so when became when he this after the success of Clerks, he got Mallrats. He gave a line reading to Shannon Doherty, who at the time, she was big in Beverly Hills
Yeah.
90210, whatnot. And she's like, "Did you just give me a line reading?" And he had no idea that you're not supposed to give actors line readings.
Yeah, because
It
then
just
they're
it
not giving a performance, they're puppeting what you told them to do.
exactly. And so I understand that why actors would not like that, but it's just funny to hear like Kevin had no idea. He thought he was being helpful. He had no
Yep.
idea that that was just not you just don't do that. So I wonder if there's an element of that to these especially in the early PC days, because it was like the 90s and prior there was no like predefined like structure on how like what you design a game. In fact, so much so one of the co-founders of Blizzard, Mike Morhaime, I don't know if or Morheim, he was doing like AI work in
Mhm.
StarCraft. Like he was down in the trenches doing stuff like that. Some other fun facts real quick. They knew some the overall aesthetic of like what the types of races were supposed to represent, I guess, or like the almost like if each of the alien races is a character, they wanted the Terrans to be dirty. They like just appear dirty and kind of gross and
And they
whatnot.
definitely do.
Yeah. Protoss were to be they put in the article I read to be savage or not savage, but primal, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting distinction. And then
They
they
have
just wanted
very,
the Berserk to
very much a
swarm.
Native American feel to them. Like they
I
have
could
that
see
sort
that.
of, like feudal, that sort of samurai spirit, but also like Native American connection, especially like when you look at like the game's story with their connection to Ire and how, the Kala, the crystals and the things like that, how it
Mhm.
gives them their link to one another, and because they're use a lot of telekinetic abilities and like energy and things like that. So that's why I think I like them, because of that sort of element for them. Sorry to cut you off.
Almost like there's a spiritual element to their race
Yeah.
versus like the Terrans are very they're it the way they kind of describe, I mean, you can look at even at the Terran storyline, it's all with civil war and like
Yep.
backstabbing each other and this and that. And the Zerg are just it's a hive mind, I guess we're like 30 minutes in and we really should explain like there's three alien races in this game for
Yes.
those who've never played it. We've referenced them pretty heavily throughout this, but the Zerg, the Terran, and the Protoss. Terran are humans, Protoss are aliens, and the Zerg are another type of aliens. um And that's, like I said before, that's kind of what they used to define those races. Terran were to be dirty, Protoss were primal but not savage, and Zerg just swarm. That's a perfect description for them. They just
Yeah.
swarm. Uh, the some other quick things, they at the time they Blizzard did all of their graphics still done by hand. They're all hand drawn graphics still, like pixel by pixel. And so all the big games coming out at this time were doing 3D models, and they were kind of behind with that. So they started making 3D models, and when they took the 3D model and rendered it into like a 2D sprite, kind of like what they do with Donkey Kong and whatnot, they found it didn't look great. It was kind of muddy and just overall didn't look good. So they made the sprites. How did I write it? Or how did they say it? They made them thicker and wider. They like them thick boys, I guess.
I was about
And
to say, nothing wrong with the thick Terran now. Hold on.
nothing wrong with a thick Terran or a thick Toss. Um, they they so they made it wider and thicker, and that kind of gave the over the top cartoony style that we've come to know with Blizzard style games. That hyper pronounced look that you see in Warcraft and you see in StarCraft and you see in Diablo. Well, not as much in Diablo, but still. And they were for each of the models, they were limited to only 15 colors. They could only choose 15 colors for each of the models, which I guess wouldn't be like too bad, but I'm also not an artist. Any artists out there, let me know how limiting 15 colors per character is. I'd be curious because I'm so
It
used to like
makes
the NES
sense.
was allowed like 4 or something, some
Yeah.
shit like that.
It makes sense when you look at, like, the designs of the different units, like, they largely have kind of a sort of primary color associated with them. Obviously,
Hmm.
like Protoss Zealot, for example, mostly like kind of a yellow and then like the grayish for their skin, so they really work within like those two colors, but then variations of those two colors. So it'll be like, a yellow going into like more of a gold or, things like that. So it makes sense that it's like that. The Marines are like a light blue and a gray.
Hmm. That's obviously that helps visually to make each of the races distinct, each of the different
Mhm.
races distinct from each other. I did read in the behind the scenes thing I found that the one artist kept getting conflicting information from the different design leads. Like one guy was like, make them more gray and like narrower, and the other guy was like, make them more colorful and taller or something like that. It was like, or vice versa, maybe make him gray and tall and then make him colorful and short. Like they were just giving conflicting bits. So the guy was kind of stuck in the middle. So there's a lot, like I said, it was a chaotic development period, a development cycle for this thing. Um, Last two fun facts I have, and then a funny story I read. Uh, a band of Blizzard employees contributed a song to the game. They call it kind of like a hillbilly two-step vibe.
Yep.
And they were called Big Tuna was the band.
Big tuna.
Uh, Big Tuna, which, years before The Office. One last fun fact in the story I was going to tell, the economy of the game, the Vespine gas and the collecting minerals
Yeah.
and stuff wasn't truly finalized until like 4 months before the game's release. I
Which
feel like
is
that's some
bananas.
isn't that why like something that's so core to the gameplay? They're like, "Oh, we got it." Like it's like the same story with GoldenEye for the N64. It was done. I think it was like it wasn't even implemented within the last like a month before it was released or some shit like that. Like it was such a last thought for GoldenEye on the 64, and it kind of reminds me of that. The funny story though, they like to play like pranks on each other. I was reading, and this was actually an article from Blizzard on their website. A lot of it because they were all like 20 somethings. They weren't married yet, so like they were just kind of dicking around. And the one guy made I guess one of the elite artists think he had a virus on his computer, and they had just linked all of their computers over a network. So if a virus hit them,
Oh,
it would be kind of
no.
it was no virus. He just was fucking with him. Like it was just to mess with his head. And it like this screen popped up and was like, hit yes to format your hard drive or hit no to send a virus to every computer or something like that. Those were the only two options. So it's either you're fucked either way. And it was just a joke. It wasn't actually a thing, but it was a big problem. Apparently, there was a lot of drinking involved, and then two
Oh,
employees
yeah.
got into an altercation. And then the last funny story I heard was there was a guy who was working there who loved Coca-Cola, and he had a wall of like Coca-Cola cans at his desk. So a bunch of the guys were going to mess with him. They bought a shitload of Pepsi because the guy hated Pepsi, drank a bunch of cans of it, and they were going to swap out all of his cans with Pepsi cans, but they never got to because the guy quit before they could do it. So they bought all this
Oh,
Pepsi and gave themselves probably diabetes, maybe in the process,
that's a lot of
for
work to
nothing.
get a joke.
Right? Just for a joke. It's just nuts.
Now, like
Are
I
there
said, I love that. I love that stuff to me because again, it's like I said, it was kind of like the Wild West. You just had like these young dudes, either fresh out of college or maybe they went to a couple of years of college and then started
Mhm.
working because they learned programming and they're just they're just kind of hanging out and partying and playing like I wouldn't shock me if they were all playing Doom. Just like, hey, we're done programming for like 12 hours. Well, let's just play Doom till 4 a.m., sleep for 3 hours, then back to 12 hours of program. Like, I could see that being a thing.
I mean, apparently when Brood War came out, they were all playing it in the office. Like it was so like the boss had to tell them to go home because they were playing their own game so much, which has got to be cool to enjoy your game that much that you're not sick of it, that you would still
Oh,
play
yeah.
it after all that.
No, that
Um,
shows you if it's a
yeah,
good game or not.
I agree. Any other fun facts any other fun facts you wanted to shout out before we move on to kind of talk about the gameplay and story?
Just that, how amazing the manuals are. Like, that's the thing I always think about, like, the art design in those, the story, and some of it is, like, story that you will just never see in the game or it's never discussed. But just I don't know, the game has so much personality, and I love that. I mean, and there's just interesting things that are repurposed and utilized. Like the Terrans eh, they're like space Australians because if I remember correctly, the Terrans' origin is they were like prisoners that were like, we're gonna just send you off of Earth. You're too bad to be here. Get out of here. Like if I remember correctly, they're like space Australians. And
Mhm.
I love that. The opening cinematic where like they discover the alien spacecraft. You've got like the super southern like wreckers that discover like the Protoss ship that just blasts them. I love those cinematics. The other cinematic where the dudes like in the trenches shooting zerglings. I think that's great. So yeah, just a lot of really cool things for the game. That's all I got to shout out.
Apparently there was a lot of disconnect between the different artists that would handle all those things. So like the artist that would do like the portraits and the artist that would do the actual gameplay sprites and then the 3D artists that did all the cutscenes, they didn't have a lot of communication with each other. So sometimes there's a lot of times where that's why they visually don't look anything like it. Like I personally think like like the artwork on the cover doesn't look anything like what like Terrans and Zerg and Protoss look like, you know? Like they kind of do, but it's just slightly different than what you see in game. There was once again, it was a really hectic and chaotic development cycle for this game. So there's a lot of miscommunication. But let's move on. Let's dive into the story, the gameplay, and I have one thing I really want to say about the gameplay of this game before we kind of because I hope you don't mind going into the story because I've never
Not at all.
played story all the way through. I've played a good chunk of the Terran campaign, but I had never played the Zerg campaign or the Protoss campaign. Now, what I want to say about the gameplay is one of the reasons StarCraft has become so beloved, and it's not only just because it's a well designed game and that it's fun, it's because I have yet to see another RTS really do something the way StarCraft does. Like, if you look in other RTSs, they're almost every race or faction or whatever you have has similar build orders. I've seen it change in more recent within the last 10 years or so, but a lot of RTS games, you have workers, you go collect resources, and then you have the same types of buildings, you have the same types of units just done in a different skin, and maybe they have different stats, but by and large, it's a very similar playstyle with very different, or with very small tweaks to the units themselves, i.e. Age of Empires. Like almost every
Yeah.
faction in Age of Empires has a very similar basic build order, with some minor differences. Some races you don't have, or some factions you don't have to build like houses, or in this instance supply depots or
Yeah.
pylons or whatever have you. Basically things to increase your population cap. um, what StarCraft did that's so fascinating to me is that each race is so vastly different. The way you play them is so incredibly different. Terran and Protoss are similar ish, just because you build workers who then build buildings, and those buildings then create your units. But even so, they differentiate Protoss and Terran enough. The fact that Protoss doesn't, like, a worker can build 100 buildings all at the same time, because the buildings literally build themselves. That's one of the coolest things about Protoss. Like, you go tell them to go build a pylon, and they just spawn it in there, and then you don't have to do anything about it. It'll come in when it's done. And I love that idea for Protoss. And in Terrans, you have it's a lot more similar to what quote unquote classic RTS style would be, where it's just, you get workers, they build buildings. When your worker is building a building, they're devoted to that building.
Yeah.
Then those buildings, barracks, turn into barracks or whatnot, and then you build them, and then you build soldiers out of it. What they add into Terran is that a lot of those buildings can fly. So if you really want to, you could just up and move your entire base. It would take a while, but you could do it.
Yeah, for the most
You
part,
can't
you
do
could
that
just
with the
move.
race.
It's
And
one of the coolest aspects of the game, I think, is how
Mhm.
unique each of the 3 races feel, and how each have this really cool thing that they can do and execute.
Mhm.
I think that's what makes it so great. It's what makes it
And
stand out from the other RTSs, like you were saying.
yes, and specifically the race that makes it stand out to me the most is the Zerg. The Zerg handles unlike any other race that I've ever seen in any other RTS. Now, granted, I'm not going to proclaim to be like this RTS, grandmaster that knows all of them. There's so many out there, but for in terms of the big ones, the big popular ones, I have never seen an RTS handle a race like this. The way, like I was saying before, with the Protoss and the Terran and most other factions and races in other RTS games, you have a base that builds workers. Those workers either collect resources or build buildings, and those buildings build your army. With Zerg, it incentivizes the player to build a lot of home bases, because the home bases, they're called hatcheries. I believe they're called hatcheries if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. They
Mhm.
You need to build a lot of them, because your buildings don't directly build units. You have to you Since Zerg is kind of more of an alien type thing, your workers literally mutate and become the building that they're quote unquote building. So you have to keep that in mind. Like when you go tell one of your drones to go build a building, it literally turns into
Yeah,
that
it
building.
turns
It
into that
morphs
building,
into
so if you make a mistake, you don't get the drone back either, I don't
No,
believe. I think he just
you
detonates and
don't.
you get the resources back.
But you lose that, you lost 50 resources, 50 minerals at that point for that
Yep.
worker. And the thing is, though, with the hatcheries, they have little tiny larvae that kind of spawn out from there, and you can only build drones from your workers from those larvae. And then also from that larva is how you build your different soldiers, your zerglings, your hydras, your hydralisks, all that good stuff. Like you build it based off of the larvae that come out of your hatcheries, and there's only ever 3 larvae that come out of a hatchery at any given moment. Like you can have a max of 3, so you have to build a lot of hatcheries if you want to amass an army quickly, because otherwise you're stuck to making 3, waiting for more larvae to spawn so you can make 3 more. uh, so Zerg is so different because it really encourages you to expand quickly and move quickly because you need to build more hatcheries in order for you to amass an army more quickly. So you like when you attack a pro Zerg player's base, there's hatcheries all over the place because they are just producing soldiers and drones and what they call overlords, which is their version of a pop cap, like that it's those are what Zerg build to increase pop cap. It's truly an inventive idea for a race, and I have never seen the likes in other RTSs. What are your
Oh yeah.
thoughts? Sorry, that was a long rant, but
No, no, that was
I'm
great.
constantly impressed by it.
No, it's the little things I think that make why somebody can so easily say like, "Oh, well, my favorite is Zerg or my favorite is Terran," and then they can
Mhm.
list you the reasons. And they have different play styles and different aims and different goals that because of just the inherent differences they've built into these three races, that's what makes it so much fun, you know? The Terran,
Mhm.
they can kind of have one moving base. You know, if you have an area that you're at that really starts to run low on resources, you can just boom, let's move to a new spot instead of, oh no, I need to build an entirely new command center and a barracks and a this and a that. No,
Mhm.
you just like lift off, cruise them over to a new spot, land, boom, we're here. We can just move our base. We're mobile. The Protoss, like you said, you can just start summoning a building and then take that worker and send him back to gathering minerals or go make a new building. And that's such an advantage. Or like the Zerg, you literally feel like you are infesting this entire planet because you're building these hatcheries and you have to build on the only way you can place a Zerg, you know, building is on the creep, they call it, you know, this sort of
Yes. It's
living
like this
carpet of,
ooze.
yeah, grossness. Like and I think that's so cool, and it makes it fun and it makes it engaging and unique each time because there's these strengths and weaknesses within all of these things. So yeah, I love it. And that's before you even start incorporating more specialty type units with each of the races, like the Protoss
Yes.
and the Dark Templar or the High Templar or the Archons, the Terrans with the ghosts and the Zerg with the infested Terrans, which is incredible. Like it's just so much variety, so many cool things. I love it.
So many intricacies that you can do, and what's even crazier, like each race is like kind of adept at one thing. So Zerg, it's pretty straightforward. Zerg is good for fast attacks. There's a thing
Yeah.
called a Zerg rush. And
You can
that's
still
because you
type it
can
in
build
on
a lot of
Google.
units. Yeah, you can type. Oh yeah, you can type it on Google. Yeah, it's one of the it's you can really quickly build up an army and you can just go attack bases and hope that you will get away, like they'll get away or like that you will get away from them. Sorry, I was playing Zerg Rush. No, but they'll build up an army real fast and go attack a base before you could be ready or whoever the enemy is could be ready. Then the Terran, what I find interesting about the Protoss and Terran is that they kind of go against stereotypes almost. The Protoss are generally slower to build up. Their units cost more, but they also do a lot more damage. They're
Yeah.
harder to kill and they do more damage. Usually those types of races are defensively minded. When it's a
Mhm.
slow burn type of thing, it's usually like we're going to turtle in and then we're going to come out and attack you. But they're not. They're not a defensive race. They can be defensive because their units can do a lot of damage and they can take a lot of damage, but by and large, they are not a defensive race. The Terran are the defensive race. I mean,
Yes.
they turtle really well. Uh, Generally, like Terran was my favorite race because I love playing defensively. I like the idea of crafting a base and defending it and getting the high ground and putting a couple siege tanks up there for
Yep.
them to fire down on the enemies. And you want to make sure that you actually have a little bit farther than the tanks. The tanks can actually shoot a little bit farther than they can see. So like if you can put something out there that makes them able to see further, they can actually hit enemies even further away than they can see, which is kind of cool. Um,
And a pain in
And
the
you
ass when you're playing against them.
Oh, yeah.
You
But then that's where the strategy comes in, like, siege tanks can't attack air, so you bring in air soldier, then you bring in air troops, but then if the player is a good defensive player, they will have anti-air stuff there with them. So it's just a matter of how you figure out how to do it. But in any case, I love that each race has its own kind of thing. Zerg are
Yeah,
just pure offense. They're not good at defense. They are good at just rushing you,
overwhelming their enemy.
overwhelming. So, fun fact, oh, I shouldn't say a fun fact, a fun story. Jamie, my friend that I mentioned earlier that would have the Battle Fest, he got Zerg rushed one time in one of the most unorthodox ways I've ever heard of. So he was playing one of his, it was either his uncle or one of his uncle's friends, and what he was new to StarCraft. So, he's
Yep.
taking his time. He's crafting his base. This is probably like 40 minutes into the match. Normally it would be long over at this point, but he's still learning the ropes of the game.
Yeah.
So his uncle or his uncle's friend decided to mess around with him because he knew what he was doing and Jamie didn't. Built up he was and his this guy was playing as Zerg, and so he built a shitload of overlords out the wazoo. And overlords, for those who don't know RTS stuff in general, you have a pop cap and you have to build some type of building in order to increase how many units you can have on screen at once. And generally most RTSs top out at about 200 units,
Yeah.
including your workers and everything. For Zerg, their version of that are overlords, and what's unique about overlords is they can move. In the Terran, they build supply depots. Those are stationary; they're grounded. You can't move them. Protoss, same with their pylons. But with Zerg, they have overlords, which is great because you can use overlords to scout the area around you because they can move. So they're you only thing you would really lose is a bit of pop cap, which is a pain, but it's not always the worst thing. But because they are PopCap, but they're also movable units, you can have as many of them on screen as you want. There's no limit. You can have more than 200 overlords on screen because they don't count as units. They are they're your PopCap
Yeah, they're
increase.
sort of buildings in a way.
They're buildings, but they're moved, but they fly around and they can move. This dude built so many overlords and he sent them all over to Jamie's base. He couldn't click on anything. His entire
Oh.
screen was filled with overlords, so he couldn't do anything. He could, he couldn't click on anything. He couldn't see anything. All of his marines and bunkers were too busy shooting at all the hundreds of overlords in the sky that they just got wiped out by like 5 zerglings. They couldn't do anything.
What a cheap
Um,
move.
to pull that off would be insane to actually do. Because it really would not work otherwise. It's just really funny to me. I love that story. It made me laugh so hard. I mean, you would never do that in real life, like in
No.
any map. You would not survive long enough to build enough overlords to do that. Anyway, so yeah, I wanted, before we dived into the story and just kind of, I really wanted to just shout out like how diverse these races are. Like it's just really incredible. Like there's just so much. I mean, actually, we're talking about it anyway. Let's just keep talking about the gameplay of it before we do the story.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's just, you know what? Let's do this. You said you really like Protoss, so I want you to gush about the Protoss. What is it that you like about their play style that really speaks to you?
So, I think, kinda like I mentioned before, when I first started playing the game, my brother and I couldn't figure out how the Protoss worked. So I think that's where a little bit of it started with me. It was sort of this obsession with like, oh, wait a second. These guys are not just like pick up and play because Terrans pretty easily. You build a supply depot, you build a barracks, bam, you make your Marines, you're off to the races. Zerg, same thing. You just start making your Zerglings and your Hydralisks and you're good to go. But the Protoss, it is more strategic of an approach to how you want to play them. They are inherently stronger because all the enemy, or not all the enemies, all the units have a shield. Like all Protoss units have a shield. So you have your shield hit points and then your unit hit points. The shield will restore. So if you get into a skirmish and it goes down some and then you win the battle or run away, your shield will go back up. So eventually, like unit is almost at full strength. I mean, even if you lose hit
Mhm.
points, the shield is kind of a buffer there for you. So I like that they're stronger. They are a much slower race in terms of building because they are so much stronger, because the zealots have those shields, so they're going to be stronger than just say a marine. Not as versatile, of course, but um I love their design, just because it's such a
Yeah, yeah.
cool it's just such a cool design. I said this before, they remind me a lot of the Predator with their
Yes.
cloaking devices and things like that, and just their like base design where they don't have mouths and things like that. Kind of looks like the Predator mask, but I really dig their culture. It's like I said earlier, it's very Native American, very kind of like samurai warrior this warrior class that sort of rules, and they have a very detailed um kind of government, and a high sense of honor, and they really honor their warriors who fall in battle, so much so that like the greatest of their zealot warriors that get defeated in battle and fall get brought back as dragoons so they can continue to fight for ire. Like, that's super cool. The fact that they have like plasma based weapons, I think, is really cool. You also have like that sort of, because of the psychic abilities and connections that they have that
Mhm,
little
mhm.
feel of like Jedi about them. And then that's before you get to the coolest part of the Protoss, which is the fucking Dark Templar, which are just like, hey, you like the Protoss? Well, here's like the bad Protoss, but they're not really bad. They're just kind of misunderstood. They're the edgy boys, misunderstood,
They're
and
the edgy boys.
they're fucking cool because they're permanently cloaked units. They're like assassins. Zeratul is the coolest fucking character in the StarCraft universe. Like, there's
I
so
want
much
that to
cool
be his
stuff.
band name, Zeratul and the Edgy Boys.
Yeah, Zeratul and the Edge Lords, our lives for ire.
No, my
Yeah.
wife for hire.
Oh yeah, my wife for hire. For a dude, honor guide me. Yeah, I can do them. We'll be here all night. Uh, but no, so I just think that's so cool. Like, to me, the Protoss have the most interesting backstory and lore around them,
Mhm.
because if you go like deep into StarCraft lore, you have the race that are the Zelnaga, which I believe, if I remember correctly, I might be slightly off. Like, the Protoss were not created by the Zelnaga, but were like descendants of the Zelnaga, maybe. I know that the Zelnaga created the Zerg. I do know that. So like, there's I
Yeah.
again, I that's some deep lore that I'd have to brush up on. I don't quite remember, but again, just their sort of structure for everything. And when you look at their building designs.
Real quick, sorry. The Xel'Naga genetically engineered the Protoss and later the Zerg in attempts
Okay,
to
that's what
create
it
pure
was.
beings. So they
Yes.
created both the Protoss and the Zerg.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I thought that was the case, but I couldn't quite remember. That's another thing too. Like, when you look at the designs of the Protoss buildings, and the idea is the reason why they are warping them in is because they are supposed to technically be warping this stuff in from Ire, which is their home planet. And
Mhm.
you look at their designs, it's almost like idealistic, futuristic, like almost a utopia. Um,
Yeah.
a utopian type society that they have because of this super advanced technology. And for the most part, like, until you learn about the Dark Templar, they don't fight amongst each other. Like, they really do all work in, kind of lockstep because of their telekinetic, their connection to the planet of Ire and the Kala crystal. Of course, then you figure out, oh no, there's the Dark Templar, and they're actually considered heretics and outcasts and things like that. Although they're super fucking cool and edgy. So yeah, that's just one of those things. Like I said, I love them. The carrier is one of the coolest weapons in the game. It's their capital
Yes.
ship that summons like these smaller ships that attack. And when you get like 4, 5, 6 carriers invading an enemy base, and all the fighters emerge from them and just over it, it's mm. chef's kiss. Same thing with like dragoons. When you get a bunch of dragoons rushing an enemy, it's fucking cool. It's so cool.
I loved I what so Protoss was the first race that I really enjoyed in the game as well, because I mentioned Justin was the one who got me hooked on the series. It's his favorite race. So I remember one of the first things I ever saw was it was like, I don't know what map it was or what he was playing, but it was like a very narrow corridor and he filled it with photon cannons
Oh
everywhere.
yeah.
And the photon cannons are such a great defensive unit because they're detectors which help detect invisible units. They attack automatically. You don't have to waste any units in order to add a defense. It's just this really great defense structure. They can be easily overpowered with enough, like, it's not like they're invulnerable, especially because most things have a better range than them, but it is still very helpful because it they're going to be a pretty good defense over on most things,
Yeah.
but they can get overwhelmed. But to me, it was just a really cool idea. Like, I remember when I first started playing, all I would do is just build a shitload of those, like, everywhere. It'd be
Yep.
like you would just essentially just build walls and walls and walls, and then while the enemy slowly takes them out, you would build up a base, you would build up an army behind it. And so when they finally broke through, you would just have this massive Protoss army just waiting for them. And by that point, they couldn't do anything. Um,
Oh yeah.
this is just getting me thinking. Do you, and just speaking of gameplay and whatnot, like, we're gonna have to talk about the multiplayer,
Of
obviously.
course.
Um, I want to talk about this now, but you know what? Remind me Team Melee a little bit later for when we get to
Yes.
multiplayer. Uh, for me, Terran was my race of choice. I loved the defense. I loved like I said, I liked military stuff. So that was very like World War II esque military. You build bunkers. It's a lot more stereotypical military. You
Oh
build
yeah.
bunkers. You build Marines. You have different types of enemy or different types of units. Like, what I liked about Terran is that unit composition or like group composition was a lot more important, I feel like, than in other ones. Like with Zerg, you just send a shitload of Zerglings, go. You send a shitload of Hydras, you just go. With Terran, you really need to, and to an extent Protoss, but Protoss, since their units were more powerful, you could get away with more. Like, you would build fire bats to take out Zerglings, because fire
Yes.
bats do like cone damage. Like, every time they shoot out the two big flame geysers out of their fists, it has like a triangle cone damage around in the front of them. So it just melts through Zerglings. So what I would do, especially in Brood War, when they would give you medics, there was that new unit medics in Brood War, which we'll get
Oh
to.
yeah. Well,
Um,
what a
yeah,
lifesaver that was, literally.
yeah. So in the original one, I would usually get 3 fire bats and then 7, because you could only max out at like 12 units in a group or something like that, maybe 10. And,
Yeah.
in newer RTSs, you could have 30, 40, 50 in
Yeah,
a group.
it's way better.
Yeah, I don't like that you can only select 12 at a time. But but what it did kind of do is force you to have very specific group compositions. So I would have like 3 or 4 fire bats and then like 8 or 9 Marines, and that's what I would tell them to go and attack. So you'd have something to like cut through all the Zerglings, but you don't want too many of them because of the fire bats, because they are pretty useless against anything ranged. They move slow, they take forever to get anywhere, and while they do a decent amount of damage, it's not worth it. So you have the Marines to kind of back them up to help take out the range, while the fire bats protect the Marines from Zerglings and stuff like that. And then you would have the Ghosts, which was such a fucking cool unit, because they could turn invisible. They could you can use them to spy on the enemy, but you can also, if you build like the Terran buildings, you can build additions. So each addition would
Mm,
add different functionality to their building. So like a barracks could get, I believe I don't know if there was an addition for a barracks in the first game. Oh no, there was. Sorry, you get like, am I misremembering now? I don't remember if the barracks had an addition now in the original game. I know it did in the the expansion in Brood War, but like the factory which built all your like mech stuff, like the Goliaths and the siege tanks and the vultures and all those other
oh
units,
yeah.
you would build that so that way you could get you would have your siege tanks would have the ability to get siege mode, which would plant them into the ground, and they would do more damage that way, like a lot more damage. But then they couldn't move. With your home base, your command center, you could either build like a basically like a sensory ray, so that way you could scan the enemy's area. You could scan different areas of the map and see what was happening there. It was also good because it would unveil any invisible units, whatnot, wherever you scan.
Yeah,
Or you could build a nuclear silo,
which is
and
oh,
so cool.
there's
It's
something
very
about
hard to pull off, but if you're good at it, you would ideally what you would want to do is build, a bunch of command centers, which also increases pop cap, attach a bunch of nuclear silos to them, and get like three or four ghosts, and then they could just launch nukes you could launch like four nukes at once.
mhm,
And it was there, and there's nothing more terrifying than being
nuclear
on the
launch
receiving end of it.
detected.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
You just hear that come over your speakers. You're like, "Oh fuck, there's a nuke coming to me." Where? Because the
yeah,
ghost is invisible. There is a tiny, tiny red dot that you have to find. It does mark where it's hitting. Like you can see where you're going to get nuked, but it's a tiny flashing red dot. And if they hit, God forbid, you are like the color of your race. You know how like you can set the different colors to
yeah.
differentiate if you
God,
have
yeah, God
multiple?
forbid you chose red.
Red. You're fucked. Like, what are you gonna do there? So I love the Terran because it was a lot more defensive. You could wall off the entrance to your base, but put a barracks in front of it, so that way you could use that as essentially a gate, because your units can't pass through the supply depots, but they can move under a barracks flying in the sky. So you could use the barracks or some other building with, maybe it's like a um I don't know, I'm blanking on the other building's name. So you could use some other building to fly, to use as a makeshift gate, and it was just fun. It was fun to do stuff like that. I actually played a match last night against the bot. I was pleasantly surprised I won. I did slow down the game speed so that way it would give me time to think, but it
Oh,
also,
yeah.
because of that, the game took like 45 minutes to finish, even though there wasn't that much that happened. But before we talk about multiplayer, I guess we should at least go into the Zerg a little bit. You gushed about Protoss, I gushed about Terran. We should have had a third person on to gush about
Yeah, if
Zerg,
somebody
man.
I could talk a little bit about Zerg. I mean, I think they're very cool. Um, so the thing with Zerg, they're so straightforward. Just make a lot, run them over.
Hmm.
That's it. And it's really, what do you want to make a lot of? If you want to make a lot of Zerglings, that works. If you want to make a lot of Hydralisks, that works. If you want to make a lot of God, the super big
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I forget
yeah,
what
I
they're
can't.
called. Is
Yeah, the massive thing. Are you going against Terran? Do you want to infest the Terran, infest the command center, so then you can make infested Terran, which will explode as suicide units?
Yes.
Go with that. So I think that's the cool thing about Zerg. I think they're incredibly cool, but they're straightforward. It really is overwhelm them with speed and numbers.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, I was looking. Is it a Mutalisk?
Mutalisks
Is
are
that
the flying ones. Yeah.
those are the flying ones? Ah, damn. I was trying to.
Ultralisks, I think, is what they're
That's
called.
what. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's an Ultralisk.
Yep. So
Giant mammoth like things.
oh yeah, they're huge. And again, like that's the go-to for the Zerg. There's no finesse, there's no, oh, well you got to approach it like this. Nope. All you got to do, make a lot and unleash hell.
Zerg is interesting because it's the race that you can spam units the easiest, but it's also one of the hardest races to grasp, like to wrap your head around, like what the build order should be. Like when
Yeah.
you're new, I should say. Because
Oh
like
yeah.
when do you start building additional hatcheries so you can build more units? Because like we said, like in every other race, you just build all your units right out. You set up a queue of 5 and you just keep on making them as fast as you're able to produce. With Zerg, like if you use all 3 larva in the at the hatchery, you have to wait a little bit to be able to get at least one more. Like they don't spawn back right away. You have to wait a
Yeah.
little bit, versus in the others where you do have a queue, you can, as soon as you're building has completed building everything that you asked it to, whether it's a marine or a fire bat or a worker or whatnot, or a zealot if we're going Protoss, you can just queue up another one. Like there's no limit as other than your resources. Versus Zerg, you have to worry about your resources as well as how many larva is at that specific hatchery. Additionally, those larvae are used to make literally every single unit. It's not like the larva is only used for your drones. Like you need
Mhm.
to have lots of larvae at your disposal so you can have like, maybe these, maybe the larvae from these four hatcheries are all built like pumping out zerglings and hydralisks, like three at a time. Cool thing about zerglings though, they only take up half a pop cap. So you could have two Zerglings equal one pop cap, which is why there's a thing called a Zerg rush. So normally, if you build 10 Marines, that's 10 pop cap. If you build 20 Zerglings, that's only 10 pop cap. So
Yep.
I actually did I goofed around on one where I killed all of my drones. I got enough resources harvested and I killed all of my drones and
Yep.
I maxed out the full 200 population with nothing but zerglings. So there was 400 zerglings on the map at one time. Um, we won. Like we lost a lot, but we won.
Oh, yeah,
It
because
was
you just can't overcome those numbers, and again, I think that's what makes I think objectively the Zerg are the best race in the game because of their
okay.
simplicity. I think so. I'm pretty sure they tend to be the top in like tournaments and stuff is Zerg
Hmm.
because if you're a really good Zerg player, I could be completely wrong about this. But I think it is Zerg because if you're a good player, you know how to manipulate and get the most out of the least with the Zerg. Because as you said, you get those two Zerglings out of one egg, and they require less Vespene gas for the majority of their units, where
Yes,
the
that's a big thing.
Terrans
I
and the
forgot about that.
Protoss especially require it. You have to get it early, otherwise you're in trouble with the Protoss. But yeah, the Zerg are also super cool. I mean, they're all awesome. Protoss are just my personal favorite.
Now, before we move on to the story, let's just talk real quick about the differences in between Brood War, the expansion for the first StarCraft, and the first StarCraft. Just some of the stuff that they added. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but they added a lot of cool stuff to Brood War besides just the story. Um, like I know Terran the best and 90. I don't even know all the different aspects of it. Like we mentioned before, they added medics.
Mhm.
I believe they added a new type of air unit, if I remember correctly,
Yeah,
for Terran.
it was just the air to air. That was like the big thing is there is just the air to air ship that got added, and I'm blanking on what it was, but uh where it couldn't attack land units, but it could attack air units, and it did so very, very well. Gosh, I can't remember.
I know I'm blanking on like all basically each race got a bunch of new units added to it, and it really changed the complete overview, like the entire structure of the game. I'm just completely blanking on what those additional things were for each one. It like there was a lot. I'm googling it right now and like I see stuff comparing StarCraft Brood War to StarCraft 2, but that doesn't help me. Like what are
What
uh,
is that gonna do for me? I'm trying to
yeah.
see here. Let me look. Well, I know the Terrans got medics, the Protoss got the Dark Templar, and through the Dark Templar, you also got the Dark Archons. Um,
Mhm.
you can do the Zerg got a defensive unit, and they could attack from being burrowed into the ground. So that was like a big
Okay. And
thing.
yes, I see the full list now to here too. Sorry, go on though.
I think that was pretty much it. I ran out of gas on it. I
All right.
couldn't
So
remember.
I see here each race has new units. And so I'm reading this from the wiki. The Terrans get the Valkyrie, which is an air to air unit with
That
a
was it, the
large attack
Valkyrie.
radius, firing four groups of two missiles that then acquire their own targets from any non allied unit in range. And also the Medic, which we mentioned before, which is a super deadly add-on because one of the abilities you get in the original StarCraft pre-Brood War is a thing called the Stim Pack, which you take a
Yes.
little bit of health and it supercharges your Marines and they do a shitload more damage. I always hated doing that because you're effectively just killing your army. Like it yes, they would do a lot more damage, but I couldn't see how, because you could never heal them. I never
Yeah.
felt like it was useful. You just effectively, it's something to do with, like, to me it was only useful as a last ditch effort to survive an attack and
Yeah.
then hope that those guys, hope that you can put them off. But you combine it with medics, now you get a bunch of medics in and then you stim pack a bunch of your marines. Now all the medics are healing them while they're souped up on this power. Like, it's a really good combination. The Zerg got this thing called a Devourer, which is an air-to-air
Yep.
unit that evolved from the Mutalisk. Has a very low rate of fire, but it can inflict status ailments. And then it has the Lurker, which is, oh my god, I fucking hate the
Yeah.
Lurker
They're
in
the
this
worst. They
because
would
they were
burrow
the
in the
ones you're talking
ground,
about.
man.
They burrow under the ground, and then they have those spikes that go up.
Yep.
This line damage across the screen. Protoss got the Dark Templar, which is similar to the Dark Templar hero, but it does slightly less damage and can transform into a Dark Archon. Um, and the Dark Archon is a spellcaster capable of causing enemy units to join your force.
Yep.
And then Protoss also got the Corsair, which is, so they basically just added an air to air unit to each of the races, with the Terrans with the Valkyrie, the Devourers with the Zerg, and then the Corsairs with the Protoss. And then they
Yeah.
each gave them something beneficial to, like we mentioned, the Lurker, the Medic, and then the Dark Templar. So
The
Dark
best thing
Templars were
with the
really cool too, right?
Yeah,
Couldn't they
the
go
best
invisible?
that they were permanently invisible.
Yeah, what a fucking joke.
Yeah, they were broken. And the Dark Archon was great, especially because you could control any unit. That means you could go get an SCV or a
Yes, and
worker from the Zerg and
I
just
forgot about
start
this.
building an entire Zerg or Terran force
And it's
alongside
a
your
separate
Protoss
pop
force.
cap. It's a
Yes,
separate
it
pop cap
is.
too.
It is broken. It's so hard and so situational to be able to really build it up because again, by the time you get to a Dark Archon, you're pretty
Mhm.
much like kind of mid late game at that point just because of the resources involved and doing it. It's more useful to control units when it's like a large mass of units attacking you because it's an area of effect. So you drop that to like an attacking force, boom, you've turned the tides instantly. So yeah, it very cool. Brood War, so much gameplay wise opened up. Particularly, I think the Terrans probably got the best of it. Just, I mean, the Dark Templar are great and really good early game because they're hard to deal with, but
Yes.
you cannot overcoming medics with Marines because the Marines upgraded enough, such a versatile unit. And they can hit the air, they can hit the ground. So you got some medics, man, they're hard to deal with. But yeah, that's the only thing is like the Terrans are gonna get use out of the Marines all through the game because of the medic. Whereas like before Brood War, the Marine, yes, is useful, but you probably want to shift to something like Goliaths or
Yes,
Wraiths
Goliaths are great.
or something like or siege tanks. You wanna go into a different direction because at a certain point the Marines just aren't as useful because they can't heal. But with a medic, whole new ball game. So
Oh, yeah. I will say one last thing before we move on to the story, and not revolving Brood War specifically, just in general. I got the remastered version of StarCraft,
yeah,
and one thing I really wish they would have fixed is the pathing. I know this is a little bit of a non sequitur, but
yeah,
the pathing, because units are so fucking dumb. They get
yes.
stuck everywhere, everywhere.
Just into the corner.
It's
Yeah.
pretty much, and it's so easy to get them stuck, and especially if you, just I hate it so much. After playing, more modern RTSs where all the pathing is so much better, it is
Yes.
obnoxious trying to get, like, I don't know how I managed it on the original StarCraft. Like, it's so bad.
Have you
But
played the cartooned pack of it?
no,
It's
no.
great. Where it makes they did like it's essentially like a skinned version where it's super cartoony and it's adorable.
Hmm.
If you've never seen it, I suggest checking it out and playing it. It's just a graphical effect that applies to StarCraft Remastered, and it's all the menus and the game modes and all that, and like everything's super chibi looking. It's hilarious.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah,
All right,
it's a
let's
lot of fun.
let's start finishing up this episode with some talk
Yes.
about the story. So, Mick, I mean,
Are
I've
you
I've
ready?
read the synopsis of the story, and I'm planning on doing a full playthrough. In all honesty, I was thinking about this. I'm currently on Twitch. I am streaming Murdered Soul Suspect, and I'm,
Yeah.
solving my own murder. It's a good game, but I think once I beat this, as long as I'm not trying to play something else for the podcast, which as of now I am, but like off on the side, I think I might just play through the StarCraft campaign and just like
I'm
finally
thinking
get
about
it
doing it
done.
myself. Yeah, I've been
I think
considering,
that'd
like,
be
doing a
fun.
day. It's so great. The story for an RTS, it's amazing. So we're here. We're at the story now. Buckle up because we're going on a ride.
Buckle up your
Um,
sit downs.
in the distant future, in the year no, I'm kidding. So,
The whole
essentially
story synopsis.
the story starts on so the way the campaigns work are, as we said numerous times, there's 3 races. So that's how the story's broken down. There's the Terran. Once you complete the Terran's campaign, you move to the Zerg. Once you complete the Zerg's campaign, you move to the Protoss until the end of the game. The 3 campaigns are connected, which is kind of funny when you think about it, because at some point you're like playing against your former self, so to speak, because the player takes kind of a generic role in each of the stories. In the Terran, you're a commander. So that's all they were speak to you, the
Hmm.
player, and call you commander, because that's what you are. You know, you're essentially commanding this small military force and kind of going around and helping different Terran planets. As the Zerg, you are a newborn Cerebrate, which the way the Zerg work is there is the Overmind. He is the one hive mind that controls all of the Zerg. He utilizes these lesser versions of himself called Cerebrates, basically because with the Zerg being a hive mind, the further they spread away from the Overmind, he kind of doesn't have control and they are just kind of mindless because they have nothing to guide their, you know,
Yeah.
attack or just will. So that's what the Cerebrates do is they are extensions of the Overmind. So if you're on a planet far away from the Overmind, there can be a Cerebrate there that would control the Zerg population on that planet and direct them into which way. Um, and then finally you damn it, I'm trying to think. Oh, you are an executor as the Protoss, which they actually later retcon this and make this a character that appears in Brood Wars named
Mm.
Artanis. And that's actually who the executor in the Protoss campaign is. But in the standard StarCraft, you're just like, the equivalent of the Terran commander. You're just kind of this unnamed, unknown general, commander, admiral, whatever you want to say, a higher up ranking military
Yeah, yeah.
person. But the story starts off where you meet Jim Raynor, who is one of the main heroes for the Terran campaign. And he's a marshal on the planet of Marsara. And there's been some Zerg attacks. So you kind of get called in to help Raynor get that under control. It's not really considered to be like a huge thing, but he needs a little help with it. As you start going along, more and more Zerg attacks are happening. They become harder and harder to deal with, to eventually you have to destroy an installation because it's the only way to stop the Zerg. The planet is becoming overrun. Better nuke it from orbit just to be sure. Very aliens. The problem with that is you have the Confederacy. That's kind of the large governing body in this galaxy for the Terrans, the Confederacy of planets. Because you destroyed Confederate property, you get arrested. You're of course rescued by this guy named Arcturus Minx, and he's kind of like a broken off section from the Confederacy, like sort of like a rebel. So he comes in, he's like, "I'll help you out. I have forces, I have troops, I have money, I have resources. I'll help you." So your character and Raynor join up with him, and you meet his second in command, Sarah Kerrigan. Now, Kerrigan is a ghost. That is her um, unit type.
Now, real quick before you continue on, just putting this up now because I do know some of the events that are going to
Oh yeah,
happen a little bit.
spoilers.
Yeah, we are going to put up a spoiler alert right here because so far everything you've heard is not a spoiler. It's more
Yeah,
just kind of like laying down a lot of the groundwork and a little bit of the missions that you've played through up to this point. This is all in the Terran campaign. So, with that said, spoiler alert for the rest of the story section. Just wanted to
yes,
put that out there now. So if you don't want to hear it, uh, jump to the close to the end of the episode because this is the last section of the episode. So
yeah.
yeah, sorry, Nick,
It's
continue.
it's great. Oh yeah, yeah. So you meet Kerrigan. Kerrigan's a ghost, and the reason that ghosts are special for the Terrans is these are humans who have psychic abilities. So they can kind of read like surface area thoughts, and they're not like psionic warriors like the Protoss or anything like that, but they do have psychic abilities. Kerrigan is one of those individuals. As the Terran campaign progresses, the Zerg become harder and harder to deal with. You also at this point meet the Protoss, and they come in because essentially the Terrans have been settling on the outskirts of Protoss territory, and they don't trust these dirty humans. They want them to get the fuck out of here. So they started attacking you because they're like, "Get the fuck off our land!" So you have to deal with that and start dealing against the Protoss. Eventually, Minx, Raynor, and Kerrigan, the aim is we're going to destroy and defeat the Confederacy because Minx wants to become the new emperor of the Corporalus sector.
Yes.
Like that is what his goal and aim is. He doesn't obviously tell you the player and Raynor this. Like he's very like it's as you said before, there's a lot of political intrigue and backstabbing and betrayal. And sure enough, that's
Mhm.
what happens. And he basically sacrifices Kerrigan to be killed by the Zerg. Um, and yeah, so Kerrigan dies because she's betrayed by her own, trusted leader in Arcturus Minx. Raynor is super pissed and angry, and he deserts. You as the player follow with him. You take a small, contingency of troops, and Minx basically reorganizes what was left of the Terran forces and the Terran Dominion, and declares himself emperor. And that leads you into the Zerg campaign. In the Zerg campaign, you play as a young Cerebrate, so you are under the power of the Overmind,
Mhm.
um, but you're like a new Cerebrate. You're a brand new Cerebrate, and he feels really good about you, like your potential and what you can do for helping the Zerg, because the Overmind has a goal, and that is to infest the Protoss homeworld of Ire, because Ire is incredibly strong with the same sort of energy and abilities the Overmind has. So it's kind of like the worst case scenario for everyone else, but the best case scenario for the Zerg. Because if the
Mhm.
Overmind was to be able to infest Ire, he'd be nearly unstoppable. Like he would reach new levels of power due to the psychic energy present on Ire. So that is kind of your
Yeah.
task as this new Cerebrate is we are going to take Ire. That is our goal. So you're doing that as you're going along. You're infesting more and more Terran colonies. You're infesting some Protoss colonies. And the Overmind also has a idea. His idea
Mhm.
is he is going to create a new powerful type of Zerg with a psychic being that he was able to capture on a Terran planet, which is Sarah Kerrigan. She was not
Yep.
killed, but captured by the Protoss, or excuse me, captured by the Zerg and turned into a Zerg
What a
being.
badass story beat. Like,
It is so
seriously.
cool. And she has the coolest nickname, the Queen of Blades. How fucking cool is that?
It's a
And
great name.
when you're going through it, like, you never see it coming. They don't tip you off to the fact that, because as far as you're thinking, like, oh, I'm just gonna get like a new unit. Like, it'll just be, because that's essentially how a lot of the units in the Terran campaign are introduced, is they're tied to a specific mission. So like when you get to fire bats, oh well, that makes sense. Like, because there's a necessity in the mission. Vultures, same thing. Wraiths, same thing. Goliath, so on and so forth. So with the
Yeah.
Zerg, you think that's gonna be the thing, is like, oh well, I'll just get a new unit, and you do, but it happens to be uh somebody that you've been working with in the Terran campaign the whole time in
Yeah,
Kerrigan.
yeah.
So that becomes this whole thing. And eventually, you also run across the character of Tassadar, who is the Protoss executor. He's kind of like the highest ranking military member in the Protoss.
Mhm.
And he learns that there are ways to kill a Cerebrate. And the only way you can is the Dark Templar, because they use a different type of energy than the standard Protoss do.
Mhm.
So you, as the Cerebrate, see like your fellow Cerebrates getting killed. Like Zeratul, who is, I'm kind of all over the place with this, so I apologize. But
No,
Zeratul,
it's
who was the
fine.
head of the Dark Templar, is an assassin and straight up murks a fucking Cerebrate. And this, of course, the Overmind super concerned with that. But because of that, the Overmind is able to link with Zeratul and learn the location of Ire, which then leads to the final push for the Zerg campaign, which is awesome, which is the invasion of Ire, which is awesome. It's like the most fun um part of the Zerg campaign, because you were literally like, we are overrunning this planet. Just keep making forces, keep making hatcheries, and just burn them down. Buzzsaw these fools. It is awesome. And that ends with the Zerg, because Kerrigan gets sent off to go kill Tassadar, because the Overmind recognizes him as a threat, recognizes Zeratul as a big threat. So he's like, go deal with them. We're taking Ire. And they do, which leads us into the Protoss campaign, which opens up with the escape from Ire. Like, that is the thing of
Wow.
Ire's,
So
yeah,
yeah.
it's great. Ire is lost. Like, they're not just fucked, they're proper fucked. They are in big trouble. So it is, we have to take the forces that we can, and we have to get out of here, because we have to figure out what the hell to do. Now, during this time, the executor that you play as, you take over the army, because Tassadar is branded a traitor and a heretic because he allies himself with the Dark Templar.
Yes.
So they're like, Tassadar's gone nuts. He's working with these psychopaths. You gotta kill him. You gotta save Ire. We gotta get out of here. So that's kind of what you're doing, is you're working with the Protoss government, who are kind of like, anything, we have to save Ire. We have to save Ire. And it's like, Ire has fallen, my dude. It's really like Rome's burning around us, and they're like, I have a bucket of water. Is this gonna help? And it's like, no, it's over. It's game over, man. Game over. So then the Protoss from that point have their own civil war, because you have the Conclave, which is, the standard government on Ire, and Tassadar and Zeratul and the Dark Templar. And of course, your character, the Executor, joins them, because they're like, no, you don't understand. The Dark Templar aren't evil. They're not what we thought. They're not heretics. This is the only way we can save Ire. This is the only way we can stop the Zerg, so on and so forth. So there's the Protoss Civil War that briefly happens. And then from there, the Dark Templar are able to prove, no, we can kill the Cerebrates. We can kill the Overmind. We can save Ire. This is what we can do. So the conclave, of course, at that point says, "All right, we're going to work with you, and we have to work with the Terrans because it's sort of that enemy of my enemy is my friend." It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're not allied with the Confederacy with like Minx's people, but they're working with Rayner because he's got a strong enough force, and he says, "Okay, look, let's do this." The Overmind has left Char because the Protoss, or excuse me, the Zerg home world was Char. Overmind left there. He is embedding himself into Ire. So they're like, all right, here's what we got to do. We got to build up our strong force. We got to punch through the line and kill the Overmind. And that's exactly what you do. You build up this massive Protoss force. There's Zerg just attacking you left and right. And of course, like as you're going along through this whole way, you're like battling back to take back planets and recruiting forces and all that kind of stuff. And you get to you're doing the battle for Ire, and Tassadar is there in his ship, and he ends up sacrificing himself with a combination of those Dark Templar, and gives his life to destroy the Overmind and crashes his ship into the Overmind, killing the Overmind, which then
And
leads you into Brood War.
I think we should put a pin in the story and save Brood War as a spoiler-free thing because I haven't played
Yes.
that. I think that is a good that's enough. That's a concise enough overview of the story that now I need to go play it. I don't because I didn't know about some of those plot points, and I walked into that. That's not. I
Yeah.
asked you to explain the story. That is not an issue. So I
It's
want to
awesome.
keep Brood War for myself a little bit.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. I will. Do you mind if I set the stage for you for
no,
Brood
by
War?
all means, by all
Okay,
means.
so out of StarCraft into Brood War, here's kind of the leftover pieces. Here's sort of the where all the major players are. So Tassadar, the hero of the Protoss, he's gone. So you have Artanis, who again, as I said, they retcon this a little bit. Artanis was the executor from StarCraft.
Yes.
But in Brood War, he's an actual character. So you're just again playing as like a nameless executor.
Another so the
Yeah, just another
nameless
random
executor
dude.
the nameless executor that you played in the first game is actually now a character named Artanis.
Yes, correct.
Got it.
So he's like very much like in support of Tassadar, like loves Tassadar because again, Tassadar is the savior of the Protoss. So you have Artanis and Zeratul. Their position and their role is our home world is destroyed. Our people are scattered. We have to rebuild. We have to find our people. We have to
Mhm.
unite ourselves because the Zerg threat is still out there. Because as I said, Kerrigan was sent off to go find Tassadar. She didn't find him. So Kerrigan is still out there. The Overmind is dead. And as I said, when the Overmind is dead, who controls the Zerg? Because he
Mhm.
was it. So Kerrigan is still out there. So that sets the stage with her, the Queen of Blades. And then you have Rayner, who is also in the same kind of in the same boat as the Protoss of I have to pick up the pieces here of we have the Minx and his kind of empire and things like that, but there is a new wrinkle because there's a new cowboy in town. The
Hmm.
Earthlings show up and they are ready to whoop Minx's ass. They're like, "Hey, bub, we got this now." So you have the United or like the Earth Defense Force that
Yeah,
shows
yeah.
up. And then so now you have Minx who's having to deal with Rayner and then has to deal with this force that's come from Earth. And they're also like, wait, Zerg? What? Hold on. So that's kind of setting the stage for Brood War is it's it's magic. Like the stories of StarCraft into Brood War, the story as a whole is incredible. So definitely play Brood War. I won't say anything more than that, but it just there's so much. And another cool thing, if memory serves correct, the campaigns are in the reverse. So you
Hmm.
start as Protoss and go into I think you go into Terran and then
Oh,
end with
yeah,
Zerg.
yeah, yeah.
Or you go into I can't remember. I could be wrong, but
I
if I
think
remember
you're right.
correctly, it's the reverse.
I think you're right with that. Um, I from what I remember at least. Anyway, uh before we close out the episode, I have one final thing. Let's just talk a smidge about the multiplayer, just some quick multiplayer memories. And that's what I mentioned before. I wanted to talk about Team Melee, and it's something I really wish more RTS games did. Do you remember Team Melee, like what that was?
I don't. Was this a because I know one of the cool things, and I know that people will credit Warcraft 3 largely for this, but I always think of StarCraft with when I think of things like Dota and like League of Legends. To me, it
Hmm.
really came out of StarCraft because there were StarCraft had an amazing like custom map and custom game type creation suite.
Yes, yeah.
Like it you could put in custom audio files, custom images. There was so much cool stuff that you could do and build. So was it something like that? Was it built from that or was it a game type?
No, it was built into the game initially. What Team Melee was is that two players could control the same units.
Oh, that's right. I do. Okay, yes, I do remember
Yes.
that now. Okay.
I had one of my favorite matches ever. It was basically four friends of ours. Two of us were it was and we were playing against each other. So two friends controlling one set of units, me and another friend controlling another. So it was four people total all, but it was only technically two factions. So what we did was because you can pick your own races. So one person would pick Terran, the other person would pick Protoss, and vice
Yeah.
versa. And so what ended up happening was I just it takes a little bit because you only get one base to start. So maybe if you choose Terran and Protoss, maybe you start off with a Protoss base, you'll have one Terran worker, but you won't have any Terran base. So you have no
Yeah.
way of building a Terran base until you get enough resources and all that stuff. So it starts off a little weird, but and say you're the one that chooses Terran and you only have that one Terran worker, you can't do diddly squat
Yeah.
just yet. But you're still, or I mean, you can, but it's hard to like control at the same time. Like in the beginning, it's very difficult for more than one person to play because you only have five workers. What are two people going to do with five workers together?
Yeah.
Um, so what we did was we were able to build it up to the point where we had five or sorry, I was focusing exclusively on the economy and my friend was focusing exclusively on the military. So I was just expanding and making sure resources were going well and doing research to upgrade the different unit abilities. And while also building soldiers to send over, and he was just focused on like repair that bunker, there's an attack coming
Yeah.
over here, just all the micromanaging of the tactics. One of the most fun multiplayer matches I've ever played, and I really wish that I would see more stuff like that in RTS games where there's two players controlling the same units. Like that's such a cool
Agreed.
idea. um and then you mentioned the level editor. I did play one map like that, and it was like called like the fastest map ever, and it was basically they since you could it was like, it was like kind of a bit of a hack. They stacked like hundreds of mineral sources on
Yep.
top of each other in one single space and placed it immediately next to the base. So you could just build like 60 workers and they wouldn't have to move at all.
Yep,
Like
they'll
they
just
would and because there was like a 400 stacked on top of it, like they would never have to go find another mineral source or something like
Mhm.
that. They would all just go to it. It was great. Like you would it was so fast. Like games would go by so fast because you would build up an economy so quickly. It was nuts. But yeah, those are just some quick multiplayer memories that I had. What about you, Mick? Let's wrap it up with some of your multiplayer memories.
Absolutely. So I was obsessed with the custom game types because people would get so creative with them. There would be like tower defense ones. I mean, you
Hmm.
would even have guys that would just build like different movies. Like I remember
Yeah.
somebody made a straight up aliens map and it was you had like you could play as Ripley or you could play as Bishop and you could like pick you would like move a little unit over to this character select so to speak and then that was your character and you would like travel through and fight off the xenomorphs and stuff like that so that was awesome. Somebody even made Magic the Gathering, to where you could play
Really?
essentially Magic the Gathering in it. It was unreal. Like, I loved it because you could just go to these custom game types and just
Mhm.
people would make all sorts of things. Like I said, there would be like tower defense modes that, as we now know, like Defense of the Ancients and League of Legends were born from Warcraft 3, and those like custom game types and map editors. But before Warcraft 3 was StarCraft, where people were doing that stuff. Warcraft 3 just had a stronger, you know, builder ultimately because it was a
Yeah.
newer game. But I remember playing a lot of those, but my fondest memory was back in the days where you would have a clan that you could join of guys. And I joined one that was Star Wars based. So all of our, you know, call signs or whatever for the game had Darth in front of them. So
Okay.
because they were the Sith Lords, so you would be, I would be like Darth Mick Arcade or whatever, and we
Yeah.
would do team games together, and you would get you'd get recruited into it and stuff like that, and it was a lot of fun. It was one of those like super early memories of just fun interactions and fun activity where it was really just was fun and it wasn't serious, and you didn't take it too serious. And if you lost, you were like, oh well, I'll get them next time. And very pure memories for multiplayer of StarCraft. Like I said, I know there were a few people that were like, "You're a piece of shit." After you've,
I mean, that's every gaming multiplayer
yeah,
experience just
exactly.
about.
But it was different than it is now. I never felt like it was crazy competitive because that was another really cool aspect about StarCraft, and Warcraft 3 to an extent, and Diablo was the same way. Is they would do like the ladder system where if you went and did ladders, that was more competitive and more hardcore and harder. But other than
Yeah.
that, you could just join random games and people would tell you like, "Oh, this is the game type," or "This is the map," and you know that's the other cool thing about StarCraft is there are times where you could play against 7 other people in one map, and it was a blast because then you're like, "Oh, man, what's this dude's, Terran technique? Oh, look at this guy's Zerg technique." Like, it's a lot of fun, so I have nothing but, like, positive good memories from StarCraft multiplayer. I'm sure it is just as pure and wonderful now as it was
Oh
then.
yeah, 100%.
No
I wish I
toxicity at all.
I wish I had, like, more pure memories of it. It wasn't because I actually had any bad experiences per se, it's because, those battle fests that I was
Yeah.
talking about, I'm not one of the many reasons I play against bots is because I get so mad playing against people.
Oh, that's fair.
I
I do
get
too.
I get really upset when it for some reason it just feels more personal, and it's not. It's just
Yeah.
somebody playing a game, but for some reason I have a hard time regulating my emotion with that. And I don't like how I feel when I play against people. It's not even necessary, like, even if I'm not blowing up at someone or something like that over something that I fucked up on, like,
Yeah.
it's still, I don't like how it feels. If I lose against a bot, I don't mind as much, or if I'm doing poorly against a bot, I'll get mad, but it's a different kind of mad. It feels a lot more fair, if that makes sense, versus human. And that's one of the reasons I've never gotten great at RTS is because I don't ever play against bots. Like, I don't know. It's weird. So I don't know. I love StarCraft though. I really do enjoy playing it. And I'm not gonna lie, when we're done recording this, we've been recording for almost 2 hours. We started late and it's almost like it's 10:30. It's 10:30 right now. So once we're done, I'm probably gonna play around. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie. Like, I
It's
really
so
enjoy
good.
this game.
Yeah, it's such a good game, and I think that's another great thing too, especially with like the remaster. Because if you
Mhm.
went to go pick up the original, yeah, it hasn't super stood the test of time in terms of graphics. Doesn't look bad, but it's obviously not like as clean. But now with the StarCraft remaster, it's it's so easy. It's just a pick up play. It's very fun. Like I said, I think you're gonna have a blast with the story, because I gave such a high level overview, but there are some legitimately moving and heart wrenching performances that the actors give throughout the course of the story. To where when Kerrigan dies, you feel it. You feel it because you spend time with her, and the
Mhm.
relationship that her and Raynor have that starts off as like playful and then kind of turns into like oh, there's a little more
But
here. There's like a touch of
yeah,
romanticism.
yeah.
It's incredible. It's such a great story. And Arcturus Minx is a piece of shit.
It's wild to me that, like, this is the second RTS series now that I've talked about, Command& and Conquer being the first one, where the people who portray the actors in this game aren't necessarily actors. Like, they're people
Yeah,
who just kinda took the role, and it's really amazing at how well they ended up doing it. Now, they played to their strengths in Command& and Conquer where they knew they weren't actors, so they just played it off purposely being cheesy. Like, the whole
yeah,
thing was meant to be over the top and cheesy. StarCraft is a bit more earnest, but it's earned.
yeah.
It's an earnestness that is earned. But, yeah, so if for those who are listening to this and you have not played StarCraft, and if you ever played an RTS, but I would actually suggest trying StarCraft 2 first just because there's difficulty modes on
Yeah.
that and you can change it to very easy, and very easy bots do like nothing. They're pushovers. It's laughable how easy they are. But it at least will give you an idea of how an RTS game will work. But StarCraft is still worth it, man. Like
Mhm.
it's not as user friendly as it used to be, just or as what we're used to now, just because of the fact, like I said, you can only have 12 units in a group. The grouping is really rough and the pathing is awful. It was great at the time, but
Yeah.
or it
But
was at
it
least
it's
adequate at the time, but it's hard to deal with now
it's
when
been
the
over
units
20
aren't going where
years,
you want to.
like
Yeah. So with that said, I do think it's worth checking out, and as Mick has said before, go play it. It's worth playing.
Yeah, it's
With
fantastic.
all of that said, we're going to wrap this up. Mick, where can the good people find you online?
Well, I stream on Twitch on my personal channel at twitch.tv/Mick Arcade. You can also catch me on my Dungeons and Dragons troop channel, which is Playotic Games. That's twitch.tv/Playotic Games. And I am on the Twitter machine, the good old bird app.
Mhm.
And that's twitter.com/Mick Arcade. And the cool thing about that is if you go there, you can find my link tree, and that has a link to pretty much anything and everything I do. That's got my voice acting reel. I am a professional voice actor. I'm always looking for opportunities. So please feel free to reach out if you have any need for voice talent. But it's got my reel on there if you want to hear some of the work that not the work. If you want to hear what I can do there, it's got my Twitch stuff. It's got pretty much anything and everything that's relevant to what I do is on that link tree, and that can be found on Twitter, or you can just go to Linktree, Mick Arcade.
All right. And as usual for me, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Still Loading Pod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find it. It allows more people. It shows up. It pleases the algorithm gods, and it shows the
Yes.
podcast to more people. So please consider doing that. If you want to support me monetarily, though, you could go to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For just $1 a month, you can get all the episodes a few days earlier at a higher bitrate, as well as access to a patron exclusive Discord. Or if you want to support me at the $5 level, you will get all of that plus 2 bonus episodes a month. And at the time of this episode being released, this will be coming out September 18th. 2 days ago, I released the first episode of the Still Bonding podcast over for the $5 patrons. Still Bonding, if you couldn't tell what that was, it is me and my friend Erica Gwynn bonding over James Bond. And we have done the first episode already. It's Dr. No. I'm actually, at the time of this recording, I'm still in the middle of editing it. And we recorded over 3 hours of content. After editing so far, we're already down to about below a little bit below 3, but it's a long episode. I think you all will enjoy it. I've been enjoying editing it. So if that interests you, if you've wanted to hear me gush about James Bond, head on over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod for the at the $5 level. So you will get 2 bonus episodes, the Still Bonding podcast, which comes out monthly, as well as all the stuff at the $1 tier. But the most important shout out is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to go support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that will do it for this episode of Still Loading. Mick, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. I love what you do. It's a lot of fun. I always have a fun time when I listen to your show. So it was really
Thank
great
you.
to be on. I can't wait to do it again.
I will have you back on for certain. So, with all that said, thank you all for listening, and I will see you all next time.